The Jutes' arrival in Britain was not a sudden invasion, but a series of calculated movements. A migration shaped by both opportunity and necessity, and the traces they left behind revealed the subtlety of their approach. Archaeological evidence from cemeteries, settlement sites, and burial goods suggests that these were organized communities, often arriving in family groups rather than as isolated warriors, bringing with them the tools, crafts, and knowledge necessary to establish a new life on foreign soil. Some researchers propose that their initial settlements along the coasts of Kent and the Isle of Wight were chosen for strategic reasons: proximity to navigable rivers, fertile soils, and defensible positions. The coastline itself, rough and windswept in places, would have been both a barrier and a lifeline, offering routes for trade, communication, and travel, while presenting the constant challenge of storms and tides. Timber halls, reconstructed through post-hole patterns and surviving timbers, hint at the scale of Jutish architecture: long, narrow buildings with thatched roofs and central hearths, capable of housing extended families and hosting communal gatherings. The spatial organization within these halls, from raised sleeping platforms to designated areas for craft production, speaks to a structured social hierarchy and the careful division of labor that sustained these communities. Yet, beyond the physical, it is the subtler cultural practices that reveal the Jutes' identity. Burial customs, for instance, varied according to status, with grave goods carefully selected to signify wealth, occupation, or spiritual beliefs. Weapons, jewelry, and imported items were often interred alongside the deceased, suggesting a worldview in which social identity and preparation for the afterlife were closely intertwined. Isotopic and DNA analyses now allow us to see the movement of people as well as goods. Many of the individuals buried in Kentish cemeteries spent their childhoods in Scandinavia, confirming that these were not merely cultural influences transported across the sea, but populations physically relocating and establishing roots in new terrain. Some historians believe that these migrations were accompanied by complex social negotiations with local Romano-British populations, involving intermarriage, alliances, and exchanges that shaped emerging cultural identities. The landscape, dotted with early settlements, cemeteries, and ritual sites, seems alive with the echoes of these interactions, a palimpsest of negotiation, adaptation, and continuity. And yet, for all that we can reconstruct, gaps remain: questions about daily life, the rhythms of seasons, the whispers of personal histories that never made it into chronicles or graves. From one settlement to the next, from hall to field, the story of the Jutes unfolds like a map of human ambition and resilience, leaving us to wonder how much of their spirit survived in the land they shaped, and how much is lost forever to the mist of time. As we move deeper into the lives of the Jutes, it becomes clear that their influence extended far beyond mere settlement. It penetrated the very structures of governance, law, and social organization in the regions they inhabited. The Kentish legal codes, preserved through meticulous transcription by later medieval chroniclers, offer tantalizing glimpses of a society governed not only by force but by complex, customary law, reflecting centuries of Germanic tradition adapted to a new environment. Compensation schedules for injury, inheritance rules, and procedures for dispute resolution were codified in ways that diverged from neighboring Anglo-Saxon practices, suggesting a conscious effort to maintain tribal identity while integrating into broader networks of power. Some researchers argue that these legal distinctions acted as markers of cultural continuity, a way for the Jutes to assert their heritage, even as they navigated alliances with other emerging English kingdoms. Meanwhile, the material culture of daily life, from the pottery produced in local kilns to the iron tools forged in workshop spaces, reveals a community simultaneously pragmatic and artistically expressive. The texture of pottery, the grain of timber used in construction, and the gleam of metalwork all tell a story of meticulous craftsmanship, of skills honed over generations and transported across the North Sea to a new world. Trade networks, both local and continental, allowed the Jutes access to exotic materials, whether Mediterranean glass or Scandinavian amber, creating a cultural economy that combined self-sufficiency with cosmopolitan sophistication. Beyond commerce and craft, the spiritual life of the Jutes also left its imprint, particularly as Christian missionaries began to arrive. The conversion of Ethelbert and the establishment of Canterbury as a religious centre illustrate the delicate balance between old traditions and new faiths, as Jutes adapted their ancestral beliefs to accommodate ecclesiastical authority while retaining elements of prior customs. Monastic chroniclers preserved these stories not merely as pious records, but as narratives that reinforced social cohesion and political legitimacy, connecting contemporary institutions to ancient foundations. Even the landscape bears their mark. Place names ending in ing or ham indicate settlement clusters, tribal territories, or family groups, linguistic footprints that survived centuries of political upheaval and cultural blending. And yet, despite the wealth of archaeological, legal, and documentary evidence, the Jutes remain elusive in certain ways. Who were the ordinary people, those whose names and deeds were never written down? How did they perceive their place in the shifting tapestry of early medieval England? Each dig site, each recovered artifact, each line of preserved lore offers clues, but the full picture is never fully revealed. As we leave the halls and cemeteries of Kent, the faint echoes of their lives linger, prompting a question that historians and archaeologists alike continue to ask. What subtle threads of Jutish identity wove themselves into the emerging fabric of English culture, and which threads were quietly lost to the currents of time? Next, we move to the complex web of migration and settlement that brought the Jutes across the North Sea and into the fertile lands of southeastern England, a journey that some scholars describe as both daring and meticulously organized, rather than the chaotic invasions often imagined. Picture a fleet of wooden vessels, their sails taut with the northern winds, creaking over cold, rolling waves as families, craftsmen, and warriors sought new homes far from the familiar coasts of Jutland. Archaeological evidence, particularly from cemetery sites such as Fingalsham and Eastery, paints a vivid picture of this migration. Graves containing personal belongings, tools, and jewelry that travelled with these people, each object a tangible link to their homelands. Radiocarbon dating and isotopic analyses of skeletal remains reveal that many of these settlers were not lone adventurers but entire communities, moving as kinship groups with complex social hierarchies intact. Strontium isotope analysis of teeth indicates childhood origins in Scandinavian regions, suggesting deliberate, multi-generational relocation rather than sporadic incursions. Once on British soil, the Jutes did not merely survive, they adapted, reshaping their environment with advanced agricultural techniques that cleared forests, drained wetlands, and intensified cultivation to support growing populations. Pollen and floral analysis show a striking combination of imported Germanic crops and livestock management, integrated with exploitation of local British resources, a strategy that maximized food security while maintaining familiar dietary practices. Settlements reveal carefully planned layouts, timber halls aligned along structured plots, drainage channels cutting through villages, and designated areas for craft, production, and storage, all pointing to leadership capable of orchestrating large-scale community development. Meanwhile, the social stratification reflected in burial assemblages from simple graves to richly furnished tombs indicates a society organized by status, wealth, and possibly occupational specialization, challenging earlier assumptions that early Germanic settlers lived in egalitarian, primitive clusters. Trade connected these communities far beyond Kent, with amber from the Baltic, glass from the Mediterranean, and metalwork from Scandinavian production centers suggesting participation in wide-ranging exchange networks. And yet, despite this apparent sophistication, the Jutes' identity remained delicate and malleable, negotiated daily through interactions with neighboring Anglo-Saxons, Romans remnants, and Celtic Britons. Each artifact, each settlement pattern, each isotope reading whispers fragments of a story, a people on the move, retaining memory of home while carving a new existence. And as we begin to consider their genetic legacy, the question arises, how much of these early migrations and cultural adaptations survived the centuries, hidden within the DNA of modern populations, quietly shaping the English people long after the last Jutish hall had fallen silent. From one mystery to the next, we now delve into the legal and cultural imprint the Jutes left behind, subtle yet enduring traces that survived long after their political independence faded into history. Imagine walking through the rolling landscapes of Kent, the air heavy with the scent of damp earth and ancient forests, knowing that beneath your feet lie centuries of human decisions, disputes, and agreements that shaped the governance of an entire region. Medieval chroniclers, poring over Kentish law codes, noticed patterns distinct from other Anglo-Saxon territories' compensation schedules, inheritance customs, and procedural rules that diverged sharply from Saxon or Anglian practices. Some researchers suggest these legal differences were far more than bureaucratic quirks. They were the living memory of Jutish tribal organization, codified into written law long after the last Jutish kings had disappeared. These codes preserved notions of fairness, hierarchy, and kinship responsibility that likely guided communities through disputes, marriages, and land inheritance, and provide a rare lens into the social psyche of early medieval Germanic settlers. Yet law was only one thread in a tapestry of cultural persistence. Place names, those stubborn linguistic fossils embedded in the landscape, revealed the reach of Jutish influence. Names ending in ing or ingium, such as Eastri or Sturi, map out a network of settlement patterns that correspond with archaeological evidence of early Germanic occupation, even as phonetic shifts and language evolution modified these names. The roots echo the Jutes dialects, offering subtle proof that their cultural identity endured within the land itself. These linguistic and legal traces intertwine with oral traditions preserved within local communities, family genealogies, festival practices, and folk tales that encode knowledge of ancient settlements, heroic ancestors, and communal responsibilities. Anthropologists have noted that such oral memory can often rival written sources in accuracy, capturing details about community boundaries, prominent lineages, and socio-political norms. Meanwhile, the Christian Church in Kent, with Canterbury at its heart, played a dual role in both preserving and transforming Jutish memory. Early charters, saintly hagiographies, and ecclesiastical records documented legal precedents and religious observances, creating continuity between pre-Christian tribal authority and new ecclesiastical governance. The convergence of law, language, and religion in this region reflects a fascinating interplay of adaptation and preservation as Jutish traditions were absorbed, modified, and repurposed within a broader Anglo-Saxon framework. And yet, even amidst Christianization and political integration, the faint echoes of Jutish culture persisted, leaving modern historians and archaeologists to wonder how much of their worldview, their social structures, and their sense of belonging survived centuries of change, quietly influencing English society in ways we are only beginning to understand. Next, we move to the intricate tapestry of Jutish settlement and migration, a story written not in ink but in soil, timber, and the faint traces of daily life that endured for centuries. Picture the windswept coastlines of Denmark, where the Jutes first forged their communities, their longhouses rising against a grey sky, the smell of salt and smoke hanging in the air, the creak of timber echoing across the shore. Some researchers suggest that these early Jutes, driven by population pressures, political upheaval, or the allure of new lands, began a movement that would leave indelible marks on southern Britain. By the mid-5th century, this migration was no scattered drift of wandering tribes. Evidence points to coordinated settlement patterns, with entire communities, including families, craftsmen, and warriors, crossing the North Sea together. Archaeological excavations at Kentish sites, like Eastry and Dover, revealed timber halls, carefully constructed burial mounds, and tools that reflect both Scandinavian techniques and adaptations to the English environment. The sophistication of these structures speaks to a people deeply knowledgeable in engineering, woodworking, and landscape management, capable of translating their cultural identity into functional, enduring spaces. Dendrochronology has even allowed archaeologists to pinpoint construction phases, showing how settlements expanded and evolved over generations, suggesting a deliberate and strategic approach to colonization rather than haphazard occupation. Meanwhile, cemeteries like Fingalsham provide a stark, tangible record of Jutish life and death. Graves filled with locally crafted items, alongside imported goods from continental Europe, hint at long-distance trade networks, social hierarchies, and a culture attuned to both local resources and broader European connections. Isotopic analysis of skeletal remains tells an even more compelling story, revealing childhood origins in Scandinavia for many individuals, confirming large-scale migration rather than isolated arrivals. Dietary evidence, derived from carbon and nitrogen isotopes, shows a blend of traditional Germanic livestock management and exploitation of British marine resources, indicating adaptive strategies that preserved cultural practices while responding to new environmental opportunities. Yet even as these settlers rooted themselves in foreign soil, their presence introduced a complex interplay of integration and distinction, blending with Romano-British communities while maintaining recognizable Jutish cultural markers. Each artifact, burial, and timber post raises a question that haunts historians. To what extent did these migrants reshape the land? And how much did the land reshape them in return, leaving traces of identity that linger beneath the surface of southeastern England, waiting to be uncovered? From the windswept shores of initial settlement, we now move inland into the very heart of Jutish communities, where daily life unfolded in ways both familiar and alien to the modern observer. Imagine the rhythmic pounding of hammers in workshop yards, the hiss of molten metal as blacksmiths shaped iron into weapons, tools, and and ornamental jewelry, their hands guided by techniques passed down through generations. These were not merely utilitarian objects. Some researchers believe that the intricate patterns etched into brooches and swords carried symbolic meaning, markers of identity, status, and ancestral heritage. The Jutes dwellings, long timber halls with thatched roofs, were hubs of communal life, their interiors alive with the mingling of work, feasting, and ritual. Archaeologists have uncovered post holes arranged with geometric precision, suggesting careful planning and a deep understanding of both structure and space, while hearths and storage pits hint at agricultural management that supported growing populations. Fields surrounding these settlements reveal evidence of systematic forest clearance, soil enrichment, and crop rotation, techniques that would have transformed the landscape and provided sustenance for a thriving community. Yet even with such organization, the Jutes maintained a connection to mobility, to the sea, which remained a lifeline for trade, exploration, and cultural exchange. Amber beads, glass vessels, and metal objects from Kentish cemeteries trace roots back to the Mediterranean, Scandinavia, and the European continent, suggesting networks of exchange far more extensive than previously imagined, stretching across vast distances and connecting small English settlements to a wider, vibrant world. Esotopic analyses of teeth and bones deepen this story, revealing individuals whose lives spanned regions, whose childhoods were spent across waters and landscapes, linking Denmark, Jutland, and southern England in a web of migration and continuity. But perhaps most striking is the evidence of social complexity embedded in these communities. Graves at Fingalsham and other cemeteries show differentiation in wealth and status, with some individuals accompanied by lavish grave goods, while others rested with modest items, suggesting hierarchies that balanced leadership, labor, and cultural tradition. Even legal systems, preserved in later Kentish codes, carry traces of Jutish custom, reflecting a worldview in which kinship, compensation, and societal norms were codified long before Anglo-Saxon integration. And so, as we trace the patterns of life, death, and social order, a lingering question emerges: how did these intricate practices, these rhythms of existence, evolve once the Jutes were woven into the larger tapestry of English society, and which elements of their identity persisted, silent yet enduring, beneath the surface of a changing land? Next we move from the bustling workshops and carefully tended fields to the spiritual and cultural heartbeat of Jutish society, where the invisible threads of belief and ritual shaped daily life in ways both profound and elusive. Picture the dim interiors of early wooden churches and sacred spaces, where light filters through narrow openings, casting long shadows over carved wooden altars and stone markers, each etched with symbols whose meanings have been lost or transformed over centuries. Some researchers suggest that these early Jutish religious sites reflected a fusion of Germanic pagan traditions with the newly arriving Christian practices, creating a hybrid spirituality that eased the transition for communities navigating both old and new worlds. Chronicles and charters preserved in places like Canterbury hint at this transformation, documenting the mission of Augustine, the baptism of King Ethelred, and the gradual establishment of episcopal authority. Yet beneath these formal records lay the subtler, lived expressions of faith ritual feasts, local saints, cults, and seasonal celebrations that tied the people to the cycles of land, sea, and sky. Archaeological finds, from votive deposits to grave goods that combine Christian and Germanic iconography, reveal a society negotiating identity, belief, and continuity amidst rapid cultural change. Some scholars propose that the persistence of certain burial customs, careful body positioning, inclusion of personal items, and respect for family lines reflects an ongoing reverence for ancestral traditions, even as new religious frameworks emerged. Meanwhile, the linguistic landscape mirrored this blending, with place names, legal terminology, and even simple everyday words preserving traces of Jutish dialects, suggesting that language itself became a vessel for memory, carrying echoes of origin across generations. The sense of continuity was reinforced by storytelling, by oral traditions that circulated within families and communities, recounting heroic deeds, legendary founders like Hengist and Horsa, and genealogical links to distant homelands, ensuring that the past remained a living presence even as social and political structures evolved. But within this calm continuity lay subtle tension. How much of Jutish identity survived assimilation into broader Anglo-Saxon and later Norman frameworks, and how much was absorbed, transformed, or quietly erased? Each artifact, each place name, and each whispered tale provides a fragment of the answer. Yet the full picture remains tantalizingly out of reach. And as we turn our gaze from ritual spaces to the very bones of these people, preserved in cemeteries across Kent and beyond, we begin to uncover not just a culture of belief, but the very biological footprint of a migrating people, whose journeys, choices, and adaptations are etched into the material record, waiting for us to piece together the hidden story of survival, transformation, and enduring presence from the quiet sanctuaries of Jutish religious life. We now turn to the evidence embedded in the very bones of their communities, the skeletal remains that whisper secrets of migration, diet, and kinship, offering a chillingly intimate window into lives lived more than a millennium ago. Imagine rows of carefully aligned graves in windswept cemeteries like where the soil preserves the impressions of wooden coffins, decayed textiles, and iron grave goods. Each interment a deliberate act that tells us who these people were and how they understood themselves in the world. Scientists applying isotope analysis to tooth enamel and bones have been able to trace childhood origins, revealing that many individuals buried in Kent spent their formative years in Scandinavia, a discovery that transforms traditional assumptions about migration, suggesting that these were not isolated warriors but entire family groups relocating with intent and cohesion. Oxygen isotopes provide subtle yet compelling evidence of seasonal movements and long-term mobility, hinting at journeys that linked Jutish communities in England with relatives, trade partners, and allies across the North Sea, maintaining cultural and economic networks that defy the simplistic idea of a one-time invasion. Carbon isotope analysis, meanwhile, paints a vivid picture of what these people ate: diets, blending familiar Germanic staples like domesticated livestock with British resources such as fish and shellfish, reflecting both continuity and adaptation. The survival instincts of a transplanted culture learning to thrive in a foreign landscape. Beyond diet and mobility, DNA studies beginning in the early 2000s have added a startling dimension, revealing both maternal and paternal lineages that trace back to Northern Europe, confirming substantial genetic input from Scandinavia, while also uncovering unexpected diversity, indicating intermarriage, integration with local Romano-British populations, and complex demographic dynamics that challenge older, linear models of conquest. Male-mediated migration patterns correspond to warrior and leadership groups, while female lineage suggests family-based movements rather than purely martial settlement, transforming our understanding of Jutish colonization from a story of brute force to one of organized, multi-generational community establishment. Yet within this scientific certainty remains mystery. The precise mechanisms by which cultural identity was maintained across generations, how traditions were negotiated, and how memory of distant homelands shaped daily life. Each skeleton, each chemical signature, each genetic marker acts as a silent messenger from the past. A reminder that the story of the Jutes is written not only in chronicles or artifacts, but in flesh and blood. A story still unfolding as researchers unearth new evidence and the shadows of history whisper their secrets. Across centuries, as we move from bones to the built environment, the Jutes reveal themselves not only through who they were, but through how they shaped the land, how they built homes, halls, and settlements that spoke of order, hierarchy, and a deep understanding of the world around them. Picture the timber halls unearthed at sites like Yevering and Cowles Down, their beams spanning impressive lengths, their construction precise and deliberate. A combination of imported Germanic techniques and local adaptation to the unpredictable British weather. Archaeologists have traced construction sequences with remarkable precision using dendrites, allowing us to date these halls to specific years, watching communities rise almost year by year, a testament to leadership, planning, and communal effort. Within these spaces, life unfolded in rhythms dictated by craft, feasting, and the seasons. The smell of smoke from central hearths, the metallic tents at blacksmiths at work, the soft echo of wooden floors under the careful steps of children and elders alike. Beyond the halls, settlement patterns suggest carefully planned networks, homes, workshops, storage pits, and field systems laid out to optimize agricultural productivity while maintaining defensive capabilities, demonstrating a strategic intelligence that speaks of leaders capable of both vision and organization. Workshops excavated in Canterbury and elsewhere reveal a society where craft specialization thrived. Furnaces, anvils, crucibles, and waste deposits testify to sophisticated production. From basic ironwork to intricate jewelry, a reflection of both technical skill and artistic ambition. Materials, metal, glass, ambertrace, long-distance connections, hints of trade routes that stretched from the Mediterranean to Scandinavia, weaving the Jutes into the broader economic tapestry of early medieval Europe. Pottery analysis shows imported clays and tempering techniques consistent with Danish sources, blurring the line between cultural influence and population movement. Evidence that these communities carried both knowledge and people across the sea. But beyond technology and economics, these settlements were vessels of identity, spaces where ritual, social hierarchy, and tradition played out in daily life, where burial mounds and cemeteries reinforced memory and belonging, marking the presence of families and clans across generations. Each tool, each structure, each spatial decision carries traces of intention, yet leaves questions. How were disputes managed? How were decisions made? How did these communities negotiate identity and authority in a landscape already layered with Romano-British history? As we step carefully among the post holes and hearths, the Jutes speak to us through their spatial logic, their artistry, their enduring imprint on the terrain, leaving us to wonder how much of their invisible social world can ever be fully known, how much remains tantalizingly just beyond our reach. Next, we move to the material culture of the Jutes, the artifacts that whisper secrets of daily life, trade, and status. Each object a fragment of a world now distant yet startlingly vivid when examined closely. Imagine the Fingalsome Cemetery, unearthed in the 20th century, a site that held over 240 graves, meticulously preserved under layers of soil and time, allowing archaeologists to reconstruct not just burial practices, but social hierarchy, wealth distribution, and even subtle cultural preferences. Here, the richness of grave goods, iron weapons with intricately patterned hilts, jewelry inlaid with glass and precious metals, pottery marked with the hands of skilled artisans, tells a story of a people who balanced utility with beauty, function with identity. The presence of imported objects, from Mediterranean glass to Scandinavian amber, reveals far-reaching trade networks, hints at connections that spanned the continent, and suggests the Jutes were far from isolated. They were participants in a complex web of early medieval exchange. Chemical analyses of metals and glass show deliberate choices, not random acquisition, with artisans combining local and imported materials to produce standardized high-quality goods, suggesting both technical mastery and a cultural emphasis on uniformity and tradition. In cemeteries, the arrangement of goods alongside skeletal remains provides insight into gender roles, social ranking, and belief systems, weapons near male skeletons, jewelry and decorative items with female burials. Yet exceptions hint at fluidity and individual distinction, a subtle reminder that these were real people with nuanced lives, not simply archaeological abstractions. Beyond objects, the Jutes left traces in their built environment and agricultural practice. Pollen and soil analyses reveal systematic forest clearance and land management, fields carefully organized to sustain larger populations, evidence that they brought advanced knowledge of cultivation and animal husbandry to adapt to British conditions. Dietary reconstruction through carbon isotopes shows a reliance on both terrestrial and marine resources, blending traditional Germanic livestock strategies with exploitation of local British fish and shellfish, demonstrating adaptability alongside continuity. Even textiles and leather, preserved under exceptional conditions showcase a high level of craftsmanship, dyes, and weaving techniques that reflect aesthetic sensibilities and technological knowledge transmitted across generations. Yet each artifact, no matter how informative, leaves open questions. How were knowledge and skills transmitted within the community? How did cultural identity survive contact and integration with existing populations? And what stories remain silent, buried beneath centuries of soil? As we handle these remnants of a vanished world, the Jutes speak softly, inviting curiosity, demanding interpretation, and leaving us on the edge of understanding, caught between certainty and the tantalizing pull of mystery, from one mystery to the next. We turn to the Jutes' architectural and settlement patterns, the very spaces where they lived, worked, and organized their communities. Spaces that reveal far more than mere shelter. They reveal social order, hierarchy, and cultural priorities etched into wood, earth, and stone. Imagine walking through a Jutish settlement in Kent. Long timber halls rising from carefully laid post holes, their walls constructed with precision, roofs thatched with reeds harvested from nearby marshes, floors compacted and smoothed to endure generations of footsteps, hearths centrally placed to provide warmth and gather families in both work and ritual. Excavations at sites like Yevering and Cowsdown reveal layouts suggesting deliberate planning rather than haphazard expansion. Clusters of halls aligned along ridge, open courtyards for communal activities, Workshops set apart from living spaces to manage fire hazards and contain industrial activity. Drainage ditches meticulously carved to channel water away from living quarters. Dendrochronological analysis allows us to date individual timbers to exact years, revealing sequences of construction, repair, and expansion, painting a picture of settlements evolving over decades, guided by leaders capable of orchestrating large-scale projects. These halls, often surrounded by smaller subsidiary structures, indicate social stratification, with elite families or warrior leaders occupying the largest buildings. Their wealth and influence expressed not only in the size and ornamentation of their homes, but in the proximity to communal resources and strategic vantage points. The remnants of fences, palisades, and defensive earthworks hint at the ever-present need for protection, suggesting that these settlements were not isolated idols, but dynamic communities aware of potential threats, ready to organize defense while maintaining trade and communication links with neighbors. Remote sensing surveys and ground-penetrating radar in recent decades have expanded our understanding, revealing previously unknown hall sites, cemeteries, and field systems, uncovering networks that connected multiple settlements in structured, hierarchical arrangements, implying political coordination and regional planning. Each timber, post hole, and ditch is a puzzle piece, hinting at communal priorities, technological knowledge, and cultural continuity, yet leaving questions unresolved. How did these communities adapt to British topography? What rituals and social codes governed daily life? And how much of their architectural style persisted when integrated into broader Anglo-Saxon norms? As we trace their settlement patterns, a deeper story emerges, one of strategic adaptation, social sophistication, and a people shaping the land as much as the land shaped them, inviting us to imagine the lived experience behind every excavation and leaving us wondering what secrets still lie hidden beneath Kentish soil. Next, we move to the Jutes craft production and technological ingenuity, a realm where daily life, artistry, and economic networks converge in ways that reveal both practicality and cultural expression, where every artifact is a testament to skill and vision, whispering secrets of a people whose influence extended far beyond their immediate settlements. Picture the workshops discovered in Canterbury and other Kentish centres, furnaces glowing faintly in the dim light, anvils ringing under the skilled hammering of smiths, crucibles holding molten metals, shavings and slags scattered across the floor like the residue of creative thought made tangible. These were not mere spaces of survival, but hubs of technical knowledge and cultural continuity, where iron tools were forged alongside ornate jewelry, weapons patterned with precision, and decorative inlays that demonstrated aesthetic sophistication. Extra analysis of metal artifacts reveals advanced pattern welding techniques, complex alloys, and surface treatments that required specialized knowledge, revealing a mastery of materials and an understanding of chemical properties that seems almost alchemical. Ceramic analysis similarly shows the movement of people and ideas. Mineral inclusions in pottery fabrics indicate that either vessels themselves or the potters who made them had come from northern Danish sources, suggesting that technology, style, and labor migrated alongside the Jutes, carrying cultural identity across the sea. Workshops were carefully organized, with production zones designed for efficiency yet respecting safety, and the spatial distribution of furnaces, tools, and raw materials indicates planning, hierarchy, and possibly apprenticeships, hinting at social structures embedded within craft. These artifacts and remains do more than demonstrate skill. They map trade networks, linking Kentish communities with Scandinavian production centres, continental markets, and even Mediterranean exchange systems, revealing a web of economic interaction that challenges assumptions of isolation or backwardness. Organic materials recovered from graves and workshop context text, leather, wood preserved under exceptional conditions, show intricate weaving, tanning, and carving techniques, hinting at a level of artistry and technical innovation that underscores the Jutes' adaptability and creativity. Yet questions remain. How standardized were these production methods across different settlements? What social or ritual significance did certain artifacts hold? And how did the Jutes balance continuity with innovation as they settled in foreign lands? Each piece, each fragment, is a thread in a larger tapestry of human ingenuity, connecting individual skill to communal identity, to trade, and to adaptation, leaving us with the lingering sense that even the smallest object can tell a story of movement, survival, and cultural persistence that is yet to be fully understood. From craft and technology, we turn to the Jutes' adaptation to the British landscape, where environmental challenges shaped settlement patterns, agricultural practices, and dietary strategies, revealing a people attuned to the rhythms of their new world yet carrying the imprint of their Scandinavian homelands. Imagine the Kentish marshes and woodlands, the gentle hum of rivers and the rustle of coastal winds as settlers cleared forests for fields, using axes and fire to sculpt the land into manageable plots, creating a mosaic of cultivated and wild spaces. Pollen analysis from these sites shows deliberate forest clearance and intensified agriculture, suggesting that Jutes brought not only labor but sophisticated knowledge of crop rotation, soil fertility, and animal husbandry, allowing them to sustain larger populations than native British methods might have supported. Faunal remains and isotopic evidence revealed diets that blended traditional Germanic livestock management with the exploitation of local British resources. Sheep and cattle grazed alongside foraged shellfish and fish, while cereals and legumes thrived in sunlit clearings, showing a careful balance between familiar dietary customs and environmental adaptation. Isotope studies of skeletal remains provide a startling window into mobility and life histories, revealing that many individuals had spent their childhoods in Scandinavia, migrating with family groups rather than as isolated warriors, while some returned to their homelands, maintaining connections across the North Sea. These patterns hint at complex social structures, networks of kinship, and trans-regional communication, where cultural continuity met practical necessity, and where adaptation did not erase identity but reshaped it. Settlement layouts unearthed through modern survey techniques and remote sensing reveals strategic planning, dwellings oriented for sunlight and wind protection, drainage systems channeling water efficiently, and communal spaces suggesting both cooperation and hierarchy. Gardens, animal pens, and craft zones integrated seamlessly with domestic spaces, demonstrating a holistic approach to living that combined survival, economy, and social order. Yet even as we uncover these traces, questions linger. How did different Jutish communities negotiate land rights and resource allocation? And to what extent did they interact with Romano-British neighbours in ways that altered agricultural or dietary practices? Each landscape, each cultivated field, offers clues to adaptation, resilience, and the subtle interplay between memory and innovation, leaving us to imagine the tactile rhythm of Jutes at work, the scent of smoke and soil mingling with salt-laden sea air, a society in motion yet firmly rooted, quietly shaping the land and, unknowingly, the future of England itself. Next, we move to the social and political organization of the Jutes, a tapestry woven from kinship, hierarchy, and the subtle exercise of power, where alliances and obligations shaped the rhythm of daily life and the destiny of entire communities. Picture the longhouses standing proudly in Kentish clearings, timber walls resonating with the creak of beams and the echo of conversation, where chieftains presided over gatherings of extended families, settling disputes, distributing resources, and maintaining order through a blend of authority and persuasion. These leaders were more than mere warriors. They were custodians of law, tradition, and identity, mediating the balance between the old ways of the North and the new realities of British terrain. Legal codes preserved in Kentish law reveal an intricate system of compensation, inheritance, and procedural norms that differ markedly from neighboring Saxon and Anglian practices, suggesting a deliberate maintenance of tribal distinction within broader Anglo-Saxon integration. Scholars note that these laws, while codified in writing centuries later, likely reflect oral traditions that had governed Jutish society for generations, encoding social hierarchies, gender roles, and the obligations of kinship into everyday life. Archaeological evidence from burial sites supports this vision. High-status graves, adorned with weapons, jewelry, and imported goods indicate the concentration of wealth and power, while simpler interments speak to a more modest existence, together illustrating the spectrum of social stratification. Isotopic and genetic studies complement this picture, revealing family-based migration patterns that suggest communities moved en masse, retaining cohesion and transmitting knowledge, traditions, and material culture across generations. Yet power was not absolute. It required negotiation, alliances, and the maintenance of reputation. Oral traditions, perhaps performed during communal feasts or seasonal gatherings, reinforced collective memory, heroic ideals, and moral codes, binding communities together through shared stories and ethical examples. Through these practices, the Jutes maintained identity while navigating the pressures of settlement, interaction with Romano-British populations, and eventual integration into broader Anglo-Saxon political structures. But even with this evidence, mysteries persist. How did local leaders respond to external threats? And what role did communal decision-making play in shaping the evolution of early Kentish governance? Each artifact, each law code, and each grave tells part of the story. Yet the full texture of Jutish society, its ceremonies, disputes, daily negotiations, and subtle exercise of authority remains tantalizingly elusive, inviting us to imagine the hum of a community alive with voices, footsteps, and the unspoken rules that bound strangers into kin, and kin into a people whose influence would ripple through centuries. From one mystery to the next, we now explore the spiritual and religious life of the Jutes, a dimension that both illuminated and obscured their world, where sacred rituals, early Christian influences, and lingering Germanic beliefs coexisted in subtle, sometimes contradictory ways. Imagine the mist rising over Kentish fields at dawn, the scent of smoke curling from hearths where offerings might have been made to ancestral spirits or local deities, while the low murmur of prayer to newly arrived Christian figures echoed through nascent wooden chapels. Some researchers suggest that the Jutes, like other Germanic peoples, maintained a dual religious consciousness, preserving traditional rites connected to the natural world, seasonal cycles, and warrior honor, while cautiously adopting Christian practices introduced by missionaries such as Augustine of Canterbury. The conversion process was gradual, a slow intertwining of belief systems that reflected both political pragmatism and genuine spiritual engagement. Archaeological evidence hints at this complexity. Burial sites show combinations of Christian symbols and traditional grave goods, suggesting a society negotiating its identity between old and new faiths. Charters and ecclesiastical records from Canterbury and Rochester preserve hints of early Jutish religious organization, documenting land grants to monasteries, the establishment of churches, and the roles of local leaders in facilitating conversion. Yet the personal beliefs of everyday villagers remain largely invisible, leaving room for speculation. Some scholars argue that these religious shifts were instrumental in consolidating social cohesion, providing a shared framework of morality, ritual, and authority that helped communities adapt to political integration within the expanding Anglo-Saxon kingdoms. Others suggest that remnants of older Germanic practices persisted far longer than textual sources indicate, hidden in domestic rituals, seasonal festivals, and the stories passed down through families. The sensory world of these practices is almost imaginable. The flicker of torchlight on timber walls, the scent of incense or burning herbs, the rhythm of chants and songs that connected living generations to their ancestors. Yet despite these tantalizing glimpses, we are left with profound uncertainties. How deeply did Christian doctrine penetrate rural communities? To what extent did Jutish identity persist in these hybrid spiritual practices? The evidence offers fragments, shadows, and hints. A cultural palimpsest in which belief, power, and identity were intertwined. Each discovery, whether a cross-shaped pendant in a grave or the faint outline of a chapel foundation, invites us to step closer to a society negotiating its place between memory and transformation, between the sacred and the everyday, leaving us to wonder what the full texture of Jutish faith and ritual truly looked like in the quiet hours, before history recorded it in stone and script. Next, we move to the intricate web of Jutish social structure, a system that governed life, shaped alliances, and dictated the rhythms of daily existence, yet remains partially hidden in the shadows of history. Imagine a village in southeastern England, timber halls rising above the misty fields, smoke curling from hearths, livestock stirring in pens, and children's laughter mingling with the low hum of adult conversation, a world organized by rank, kinship, and unwritten codes that bound communities together. Archaeological evidence from cemeteries and settlement sites, such as Fingalsham and Eastry, reveals signs of stratification. Graves with elaborate goods contrast sharply with simpler burials, hinting at a society where social hierarchy was marked not only by wealth but also by access to trade networks, military roles, and craft specialization. Some researchers suggest that the Jutes maintained elite warrior families who exercised authority over land, resources, and local defense, while commoners, artisans, and laborers navigated a complex web of obligations and protections. Legal codes preserved in Kent show structured compensation systems, inheritance practices, and procedural rules, reflecting a consciousness of order and accountability that extended beyond immediate kinship to wider community obligations. Yet the precise enforcement of these rules, the subtleties of negotiation, and the personal influence of leaders are left largely to the imagination. reconstructed only through fragments of documents, archaeological inference, and comparison with contemporary Germanic societies. The sensory texture of Jutish social life is vivid, the clink of metal as weapons are sharpened, the smell of tanned leather from workshops, the rhythmic pounding of hammers shaping bronze or iron, the low murmur of elders debating disputes in communal halls. Some scholars suggest that these interactions, both formal and informal, reinforced identity, loyalty, and cohesion, while also allowing room for subtle resistance or adaptation by individuals navigating the system. Others emphasize the fluidity of roles and alliances, highlighting how mobility, trade, and intermarriage created networks that connected Jutish communities to broader Anglo-Saxon and continental European worlds. The evidence, though detailed in parts, leaves open questions. How did ordinary people experience power? How rigid were the boundaries of class and privilege? Each artifact, legal text, and settlement plan offers hints, but rarely full answers, creating a sense of living mystery. As we piece together the social fabric of the Jutes, we encounter a society that was both structured and adaptive, disciplined yet capable of subtle change, leaving us to imagine the complex interplay of authority, kinship, and daily life that underpinned their survival and influence in early medieval Britain, a world that continues to whisper its secrets through the centuries, from one mystery to the next. We turn to the spiritual and religious life of the Jutes, a dimension that wove together the material, social, and cultural strands of their world into a tapestry of belief and ritual. Picture early Kent, a landscape punctuated by timber halls, open fields, and the dense forests that stretch toward the horizon, where the sacred and the mundane coexisted, and every grove, spring, or burial mound might hold spiritual significance. Early Christian chroniclers, such as Bede, painted a picture of conversion and ecclesiastical development, but the truth of Jutish spirituality likely existed in the quiet ceremonies, seasonal rites, and ancestral veneration that left traces in both law and landscape. Some researchers believe that pagan practices persisted alongside emerging Christian structures, blending ritual observance with new doctrines in a manner that was pragmatic, adaptive, and often invisible to chroniclers who favored tidy narratives. The archaeological record hints at sacred spaces, cemeteries aligned in particular directions, grave goods carefully selected and placed, and evidence of early church foundations suggest a consciousness of both earthly and divine order. Organic residues, pollen analysis, and structural remnants reveal that ceremonial fires, feasts, and offerings may have punctuated the agricultural calendar, connecting human labor to cosmic rhythms. Others propose that these practices were not merely religious but also social, reinforcing communal identity, status hierarchies, and political authority, particularly as elite families sponsored or controlled ritual spaces. The sensory world of Jutish religion is striking. The crackle and smoke of ritual fires, the metallic scent of offerings, the low chant of prayers or incantations, the tactile weight of amulets or tokens placed in graves, and the visual spectacle of decorated sacred objects, each element resonating with both beauty and meaning. The transition to Christianity added layers of complexity, as missionaries like Augustine navigated entrenched beliefs, translating abstract theologies into forms comprehensible to Jutish audiences, while adapting rituals to local customs. Some scholars suggest this syncretism created hybrid practices that persisted long after official conversion, leaving subtle but enduring marks on local law, morality, and community life. The combination of archaeological evidence, isotopic studies, and documentary accounts invites us to envision a world where faith, politics, and daily life were inseparably entwined, where the sacred informed social conduct and survival strategies, and where every gesture, placement, and offering carried layered significance. Yet, much remains hidden. The precise nature of early Jutish beliefs, the emotions, fears, and hopes that guided their ritual decisions remain largely speculative, glimpsed only in fragments. As we consider their spiritual landscape, we are reminded that belief was both a guiding force and a living mystery, shaping choices, legitimizing authority, and anchoring communities in a changing and often uncertain early medieval Britain. And now, as we arrive at the final chapter of this long and winding journey, we step back to consider the enduring legacy of the Jutes, the ways in which their presence, culture, and innovations quietly echoed through centuries, often hidden in plain sight, yet shaping the very foundations of English history. Imagine southeastern England after centuries of integration, where the dense forests of Kent and the Isle of Wight had given way to cultivated fields. Timber halls had evolved into stone structures, and the political map was redrawn by kings and earls. Yet beneath these changes, the imprint of Jutish settlement remained, etched into place names, legal codes, and even the rhythm of social life. Scholars today trace linguistic traces in local dialects, subtle patterns of inheritance, and unique features of Kentish law that differ from Saxon or Anglian norms, suggesting a continuity that stretches across the centuries. Archaeological sites, from cemeteries like Fingalsome to timber hall complexes in Canterbury and beyond, continue to reveal sophisticated craftsmanship, trade networks, and social hierarchies that challenge old assumptions of barbarian simplicity, painting instead a picture of a people deeply connected to both land and continent, navigating survival, commerce, and identity with remarkable acumen. DNA and isotopic studies reinforce these narratives, showing biological continuity with Scandinavian populations, yet also evidence of integration with Romano-British communities, highlighting a complex process of migration, adaptation, and cultural synthesis rather than wholesale conquest. Even in material culture, from intricate metalwork to ceramics, we see the fusion of inherited techniques and local innovations, a reflection of a society negotiating its place in a new world while preserving connections to ancestral knowledge. But perhaps the most striking legacy of the Jutes is intangible: the social structures, the moral codes, the integration of ritual, law, and daily practice, which informed the development of medieval English institutions, governance, and community organization. These contributions, often invisible to the casual observer, became embedded in the very DNA of English cultural identity, influencing art, architecture, law, and religion for centuries. Yet, mysteries remain: the precise details of daily life, the nuances of belief, and the intimate stories of families and communities are lost to time, glimpsed only in fragments, beckoning historians, archaeologists, and curious minds to piece together the puzzle. As we close this exploration, sit back and reflect on the subtle, persistent power of the Jutes, how a small Germanic people, arriving quietly across the North Sea, could leave a mark that endured, shaping landscapes, institutions, and identities long after their own names faded from memory. Their story reminds us that history is not merely a record of battles and kings, but a living tapestry of human adaptation, resilience, and the quiet persistence of culture. And so, the history of the Jutes whispers to us across time, inviting us to listen, to imagine, and to wonder what else lies hidden, waiting to be discovered in the silent corners of England's past. Imagine, if you will, a misty coastline, the waves lapping quietly against jagged cliffs, the air heavy with salt and the faint smoke of distant fires. This is the world into which the Jutes arrived centuries ago, a people whose story is whispered across the annals of time yet never fully revealed. Sit back, relax, and let the echoes of long-forgotten voices guide you through a history both shadowed and luminous. The Jutes, often overshadowed by the Angles and Saxons in popular tales, were among the Germanic tribes who set sail from the continent in the wake of the Roman Empire's collapse. Some researchers believe they came from the Jutland Peninsula, a rugged land of windswept moors and fjords, while others suggest smaller, scattered origins, perhaps from the coastal fringes of modern Denmark or northern Germany. Their ships, slender and swift, carved paths through turbulent seas, carrying not only warriors and farmers, but the seeds of a culture that would take root in the south of Britain. They established themselves primarily in Kent, the Isle of Wight, and parts of Hampshire, territories that seemed almost to embrace them in return, with fertile lands, sheltered harbours, and forests dense enough to hide secrets for centuries. Archaeological evidence hints at a people both adaptive and intentional, building halls of timber that rose from the earth like quiet monuments to communal life, burying their dead in mounds that still mark the landscape with silent testimony, and leaving traces of trade networks that stretched across the channel, connecting them to the continent in ways that spoke of ambition and curiosity. Their arrival was not merely a conquest, but an infusion of new rhythms into the lives of those already present, a blending of traditions that would ripple through generations. Even now, centuries later, their story is pieced together from whispers in chronicles, from fragments of language, from pottery and tools that speak in their own quiet voice. As we begin to trace the Jutes' journey, from the crashing waves of their origin to the quiet corners of medieval Kentish villages, we are entering a world where certainty dissolves and mystery lingers, where every artifact is a question and every story a shadow cast by the past. And yet, in that shadow, there is life, movement, and a pulse that beckons us onward, inviting us to uncover the truths that history has kept just out of reach. But what truly drove these people across the North Sea, leaving behind familiar shores for the unknown? That question, as you will soon see, is only the beginning. From the misty shores where their ships first made landfall, the Jutes began to weave themselves into the landscape, leaving subtle yet enduring marks on the land and memory alike. Their settlements were never sprawling cities, but carefully chosen enclaves, balanced between fertile farmland, woodland for hunting, and rivers for travel and trade. Archaeological excavations reveal timber halls with precise post holes, suggesting communities that valued both structure and ceremony, spaces where leaders held councils, where craftsmen practiced their trades, and where life followed a rhythm deeply tied to the seasons and to the land itself. Some researchers suggest that these halls were more than dwellings. They were symbols of authority, communal identity, and spiritual connection, resonating with the echoes of ancestral traditions carried across the sea. Burial sites, such as the remarkable finds at Fingalsham and Eastry, provide glimpses into a society that carefully honored its dead, embedding grave goodstools, jewelry, weapons with the belief that these objects accompanied their owners into the next world. Each artifact tells a story, yet the stories are incomplete, like a melody half heard, leaving us to wonder about the lives of the men, women, and children who crafted them, who laughed, labored, and mourned beneath the same sky we see today. Their presence in Kent and the Isle of Wight was not merely physical but also cultural. Place names ending in ing hint at tribal or family settlements, linguistic footprints that survived centuries of change, phonetic shifts, and political upheaval. These toponyms, dense in regions of early Germanic occupation, serve as a bridge across time, allowing modern eyes to glimpse the contours of an ancient society. Meanwhile, legal customs preserved in Kentish codes reveal a sophistication that challenges assumptions of the early medieval world as chaotic or primitive. Compensation schedules, inheritance rules, and procedural distinctions illuminate a society deeply conscious of order, social boundaries, and the transmission of authority. The Jutes' integration into broader Anglo-Saxon society was gradual, yet their imprint endured, blending with Saxon and Anglian traditions to create hybrid systems of governance, culture, and identity. Some historians argue that this blending was peaceful, a negotiation of coexistence, while others suggest that it involved strategic alliances, conquest, and careful consolidation of power. The lingering question, however, is how a relatively small group could leave such lasting marks, from language to law to landscape. As we move forward, we will explore how their cultural memory survived not only in chronicles and codices, but in the soil itself, in the layout of settlements, in the artifacts buried beneath centuries of history, and in the very genetic threads that connect us to their world. And yet, even with all this evidence, the full scope of the Jutes' life, thought, and culture remains tantalizingly elusive, a puzzle whose pieces we are only beginning to assemble. As we peer deeper into the world of the Jutes, it becomes clear that their influence was as much intangible as it was tangible. While timber halls and burial mounds dot the Kentish landscape, it is the threads of cultural memory, passed down through oral tradition and early chronicles, that truly illuminate their society. Monastic scribes, writing centuries after the Jutes first arrived, sought to preserve these stories, capturing not only genealogies and heroic deeds, but also the subtler aspects of daily life, the rhythms of work, the ceremonies marking birth, marriage, and death, and the moral codes guiding conduct within the tribe. Some scholars suggest that these narratives were selectively shaped, infused with Christian values and political concerns, yet they still retain echoes of ancient Germanic thought and belief. The landscape itself seems to whisper the Jutes' presence. Rivers and coastlines, forests and fields, served both practical and symbolic purposes, guiding settlement placement, resource use, and defense strategies. Archaeobotanical studies reveal carefully managed agricultural practices, systematic forest clearance, crop rotation, and livestock management adapted to the British environment. These practices suggest a people who were not only skilled farmers but keen observers of the natural world, aware of its cycles and limitations, and able to manipulate it to sustain growing communities. Craftsmanship, too, reflects a society of precision and artistry. Metalwork, from simple tools to ornate jewelry, demonstrates techniques that required specialized knowledge, while imported materials such as Mediterranean glass and Scandinavian amber indicate trade networks that extended far beyond the English Channel. Every artifact carries with it the touch of its maker, the faint echo of hands shaping raw materials into objects that were both functional and symbolic. Some researchers believe that the Jutes' religious practices, later filtered through Christian conversion, retained older animistic elements with sacred groves, ritual sites, and symbolic objects marking boundaries between the mundane and the spiritual. These practices would have guided social behavior, reinforced communal bonds, and provided a framework for understanding life, death, and the cosmos. Yet much remains hidden, lost to time, leaving gaps that we can only speculate upon. As we transition to examine their settlement patterns in detail, the question emerges: how did these communities balance continuity with adaptation, preserving their cultural identity while integrating into a new land with its own peoples and traditions? The answers lie not only in chronicles and artifacts, but in the subtle interplay between environment, economy, society, and belief, a complex tapestry that continues to intrigue and challenge historians and archaeologists alike, inviting us to listen closely to the whispers of the past.